Hello, everybody. Welcome to Haberman and MIDDLEKAUFF on YouTube, streaming live or whenever you want, and our podcast, which you can listen to, take wherever you go. I'm going to dive right into our Tito's Toast today because we're sponsored by Tito's Handmade Vodka. And if there's one thing I know about the man that I have known for over 20 years, John MIDDLEKAUFF, if he doesn't go where I think he's going for his Tito's cheers and toast today, then I'm going to be wildly disappointed. John, who are you toasting today?
I actually just looked it up today because I didn't want to have my facts off. Obviously, early on in the inception of the league, I think it's fair to say the competition was probably not great. A good team had a huge advantage, be like Alabama playing UC Davis. But as the league has grown, and I don't think they've profited. The WNBA is subsidized by the NBA. Maybe individual teams have profited. We have not had a back-to-back champion, guy. Looking it up right now. Since 2002, back when the LA Sparks, they had a lady named Lisa Leslie, who was like Shaquille O'Neal, fucking dominated. And then a guy entered this league. He goes by Mark Davis. His father was a champion multiple times over, right? 3 championships. Now Mark, like his father, has multiple championships. As a family guy, the Davis family has now won 5 championships. In the 70s, multiple in the 80s, took a couple decades off, but the 2020s, Mark Davis, is it fair to say, like his father, like Eddie DeBartolo, like George Steinbrenner, like Dr. Jerry Buss, like Joe Lacob, who, don't get it twisted, Joe Lacob, who has a team. I was watching some of the broadcasts last night. They said they've already had 3,000 deposits for season ticket holders. Well, one thing I know, the San Francisco, whatever the heck they're going to call them, are going to get worked by Mark Davis's Las Vegas Aces. I had a buddy in the NFL that forwarded me a picture he was watching with his daughter and said they were booing Mark Davis in Las Vegas. That fucking
Vegas or New York?
Where do they win it?
New York.
Okay, they won it. Okay, it makes sense. I thought for a second, if the Las Vegas
Brooklyn
fan base does not value what Mark Davis has brought, no different than the Knights, a championship standard, just champions back to back. And listen, I'm no WNBA expert. How are they not going to be favored to win it all next year, guy? Are we talking three-peat? They didn't get fat and happy this year. Why are they going to get fat and happy next year?
A Tito's. I'm not even going to give a Tito's toast today because I saw one of the great tweets in the internet's history, and I wish I could find it, John, but I know you'll love it. Maybe it was Raiders Beat, but it was somebody who covers the Raiders. They posted the photo of Mark Davis with the WNBA trophy, and they said, "I will tell my grandchildren that was a Lombardi." I thought that was a great tweet. I wish I could find it, but I can't find it. So good tweet. Shout out Kelsey Plum. Did games with Kelsey Plum. She's a baller. Did Mark and Darren Waller cross paths yesterday, John?
Sitting right behind him.
Wow.
Darren Waller was sitting right behind Mark Davis. Is Kelsey their best player? Because she did the MVP, Chelsea Gray, and then
I don't know.
Is it Aja Wilson? That's the name sound familiar?
I think it's Asia. I don't know if Kelsey's their best player, but she plays in crunch time. She's a baller.
Becky Hammond, her coach. As someone tweeted at me last night, a Raider fan, say, listen, I know you're somewhat being tongue-in-cheek, and I'm really not. I mean, he's building a fucking powerhouse. He took a huge swing on John Gruden. Obviously, didn't really work. But his mind, to me, the concept was his idea was correct. Take a big swing. He did the same thing. I mean, getting Becky Hammond, she was interviewing for NBA jobs. That was
a better hire, right?
Big time.
I mean, at the time, it was a better hire. Obviously, with hindsight, it's a better hire.
But also, she was legitimately coaching. John had taken, I don't know, a decade off.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah. So, he's got himself a star coach, a star program. They even hit a little adversity, right? Because and I don't blame him. He was trying to compensate his players, doing a little under the table. Eddie style. Some suspensions were levied. Didn't phase anybody.
Maybe Al didn't do it, actually.
Yeah, they didn't have quite the cash flow.
Al preferred it the other way.
Yeah, Al liked his money. But 5 championships for the Davis family, guy. 5 championships.
Top, yeah. That's
I was
incredible.
also thinking this. If you
Hold
look
on.
around the national,
Tito's handmade vodka. America. We can finish this ad for Tito's. America's original craft vodka. They sponsor the show. We appreciate that. Distilled and bottled in Austin, Texas. 40% alcohol by volume. Namely 80 proof. Crafted to be savored responsibly. No frills, no flavors, no fancy labels. Just the good stuff. Just Tito's. We appreciate your support.
let's look at father and son combos in the National Football League. Does anyone have more championships than the Davis family as a father-son combo? Because look at like the Hunts. I think Lamar, obviously Lamar. Now Clark rattling them off. He's got a chance to rack up a couple more.
Yep.
Jonathan Kraft and Stephen Jones do not own their teams yet, right? Because their fathers are still around.
Wellington,
I think that John. Yeah, that's a good one. Because John would have a couple.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that's a good one.
Martha Ford, no. McCaskey, no. Bears haven't won in a while.
5 championships, guy.
Glazer, son doesn't own the team. York, not the son of Eddie D, hasn't won a championship.
Spanos ain't winning shit.
Spanos ain't winning. I heard that the
Bidwell's same.
I heard today that LA's bid for the World Cup is in jeopardy because I guess they might have to widen the field at SoFi, and the owner of the Rams doesn't love the idea of being the one that has to foot the bill himself to widen the field for the World Cup. I think LA has been for a while like the favorite to host, or to get the final,
championship.
Yeah, but they may not because of the field width.
Did you see a price tag on the widening?
I did not hear the price tag. No,
probably not $100,000 then, right?
Probably not $100,000. Yeah.
Well, we know our guy Al Guido will be circling because they got a game.
Yeah.
Do you know in 1994 I was at Stanford Golf Camp?
Okay.
Back when Tiger was on the team, and he wasn't around. He was out playing somewhere. The World Cup came. USA played Brazil. They lost, but they did it at Stanford Stadium. Underrated Stanford, that old decrepit stadium. It's obviously redone now. Used to host Super Bowls, World Cups. They used to get some events there.
I know.
It did not go to Candlestick.
Used to host the East-West Shrine game. I remember because my dad took me that in like '99. So
those some good days over at Stanford Stadium.
Yeah. All right.
Stanford elites are so rich they don't even have to put a name on it. Just call it our university.
Well, the guy that built all their stuff,
James Stanford,
Arriaga died last year. I think he's the one that rebuilt the stadium in an off season. One off season, they rebuilt the stadium because he had the power to do it. He built a bunch of buildings. He built their Maples Pavilion. He spent a lot of money there at Stanford.
I would 100% go to a World Cup game. If like a World Cup game comes to here in Arizona, I would go in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Right matchup. I don't know if I'd go see two random teams. But if it was like Honduras, Argentina or something, I would.
My guess is if we got a soccer expert in here, there wouldn't be a history. It'd be hard pressed to be like there's not like a Rangers Diamondbacks version of the World Series of the World Cup, where they're like, oh, FIFA not happy about this championship. Nobody's going to watch these two teams, Like my guess is the World Cup is always pretty. They're not like, oh shit, we got, I can't even think the Azores against Norway. That's not going to rate. Norway doesn't happen that way.
Well, no, honestly, it feels like the at minimum Sweet 16 can get the occasional America and stuff, but I feel like the 8 and definitely the semifinals is the same group of 7-8 teams.
Superpowers.
Yeah, it's not like the Final Four. It's like, oh, San Diego State made it. No one. It's never like Argentina playing Canada. that's not the way it works.
JD says Morocco made the Final Four this past winter.
I remember watching Morocco.
The world was like. Morocco was people were fired up about Morocco.
But I remember Morocco playing America years. It might have been in the last World Cup, but maybe the previous World Cup, and thinking they got some dudes. Their team speed was fucking good.
Half the Haberman,
I don't know if it's as random.
Came from Morocco originally.
The what?
I said half of the Habermans came, not the Habermans, but the other side of my family. The Israelis actually came from Morocco first. So my mom was really rooting for Morocco in that World Cup.
Israel's never made a run.
We had the World Baseball Classic squad. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Was Kapler managing that? No.
I hope
Jerry
not.
Weinstein,
No.
a different Jerry Weinstein, not that Jerry Weinstein. Different Jerry Weinstein managed that team. I did see today, John. There is we got a guy. I think I texted my guy Yogi Roth. Alabama has a quarterback named like Eli Holstein or something like that, and I said to Yogi, I'm like, "Is this our guy? Is this our?" He's like 6'4", 230, true freshman from Texas. I'm like, "Is this?" Yogi didn't know, but
what about the Rams? It just kind of hit me. Havenstein, their tackle.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean,
good question. Haven't checked the roster.
Have you seen Alabama's best defensive player? His first name is Kool-Aid. Have we talked about that?
McKinstry? I mean, it became news a few years ago because he changed his name for the Kool-Aid sponsorship, I think. It was his nickname.
Okay.
Yeah. This was a great little thing here today from Kyle Shanahan's press conference. You tweeted it. You want to start with this? I just thought the audio was so good. I was watching it. He said it. I texted you immediately like, this was really good from Kyle. Take a listen.
6 pick, and I knew if we were going at 6, my dad wanted to take Tannenhill. I was hoping to get Kirk in the second round and go a different direction. And we traded up to 2 and went with Robert. And I remember him telling me that my dad really liked Russell Wilson. And he said we were going to take Russell Wilson in the 4th and get 2 quarterbacks in there that year. And then we got to the 4th and Russell was gone. And I remember him coming to my room and was like, "Hey, do you still want your guy, Kirk?" I was like, "I don't know about that, Dad. We've got another direction." He's like, "No, the plan was going to take 2. We're still taking 2.
I love that. So they were at 6, and then they traded up to 2. Once they moved up to 2, they weren't going to get Robert anymore. But he wanted Tannehill and Russell Wilson. So either way, there's an alternative world where they still draft their better quarterback later than in the first round, right? Where they take Tannehill and Russ. The second guy would have been the better guy in that scenario.
Well, what if they had not moved? What if they had not moved up because Russell was gone? It wouldn't have been an option for them in the 4th round. What if they went Tannehill and Kirk Cousins? How does that play out?
Yeah, you're right. I wonder if
feel like Tannehill would have been a pretty good fit for them.
You think they still would have done that? Tannehill and did they take because they're not?
Yeah, because
I guess Tannehill was really. That's right. Tannehill's really. He was like a big time athlete coming out of Texas.
He was a wide receiver. Remember?
Right.
DeRuyter moved him over.
That's right.
DeRuyter didn't, but I mean, he was there at A&M.
Yeah. Cliff.
But wasn't
Kingsbury.
I think he just described it right there. The plan the whole time, regardless, was to do the 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Like that was Mike's, clearly his philosophical belief going into that draft. So I think it's fair to assume
you're right
that if Dan Snyder doesn't force them to take a quarterback that nobody wanted and just they stayed at 6, they could have got Tannehill and then taken Kirk Cousins. Do you know what I love about sports in general? But like the NFL draft is such a fascinating thing because there are so many trades and the look back 5-10 years. When a coach no longer gives a shit / none of it matters, even though some of them are like still in the league, and he just gives you and Kyle's good for this every once in a while. Like he really wouldn't describe what's going on with Christian, but whatever. I don't blame him. He's not, that's what coaches with injury. I would rather have just say, could you give us like 3 more draft day stories? Like, I don't really care. Like, yeah, Dre Greenlaw day to day. Okay, cool. You got another draft day? Could we go
Reuben
Foster here with the 49ers?
Tell us about the Reuben Foster first.
Yeah, round. I don't know. Because that is just really good to me. The mindset, listen, I would say that Tannehill, Daniel Jones went 6th. It would have been, I think looking back, probably a little high for Ryan. But clearly Ryan is better than, if you got a redraft of Ryan at 22, 23, I don't think anyone's taking him in the top 15, but he's definitely not going in the 3rd round, right? He's like a 2nd round quarterback. And I think he would have been pretty good in this offense. Athletic guy, pretty accurate. He just can't carry the team. I usually philosophically disagree with where Kyle has guys slotted in drafts and their value. And because ultimately it's not the coach is going to struggle with value. It's like the rich guy that just wants a home. I just want this home. If I got to pay $25 million, what's the difference? I heard Portnoy describing like buying his $40 million Nantucket house. He's like, at the end of the day, what was I going to argue? 35.5 or 40. What is the ultimate difference? And to 99.999%, a $5.5 million swing on a home is a really big difference. But when you're super rich, it actually isn't. It's no different than if you're bidding on a $500,000 house. People get so caught up with like, I'm not going above 485. Well, what the fuck's the difference? Just offer 510, get the house. In 3 years, you won't notice it all. And it's the difference of like $130 on your payment. So not even, but people get so caught up in the minutia with quarterbacks. Like if you are overdrafting a guy a round or two and he's ultimately a backup, it's a bad pick, right? But like Kirk Cousins in the second round would have been pretty insane at the time because as you see, he went in the fourth round, but it would age pretty well. Now, could he have been their starter week one? I don't know, but I will give Kyle credit on that one. Like he got that evaluation right.
Yeah.
And Mike was pretty bullish. Now, Mike has taken Jay Cutler. He's taken, he would have taken Tannehill. RG3 was not their pick. The 49ers had no problem trading for Jimmy Garoppolo. They're taking Trey Lance. Like it's not an exact science, but I could listen to stories like that all day long from the coaches that are like admitting where they had guys. When does that ever happen?
Well, it's part of why like telling us when you weren't right makes it really great because then we believe you. I think a lot of times when you hear coaches talk about grades, not coaches, but like when Tirico 2 weeks ago said the Niners had a 4th round grade on Brock, I think part of the reaction, understandably, is like, oh, did you really? Or you're just telling us that now because it worked out, right?
Isn't Draymond the classic guy in the NBA? Like we had him 7th overall on our draft boards. Like, no, you didn't.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I'm with you. I think draft stuff, first of all, is just it's some of the most interesting stuff that exists because it's like sports are not black and white and the draft is not black and white. Where you go affects how you turned out, but it feels more black and white than some other stuff, right? Look, I mean, Tannehill's a good example too because he's had a really successful career by almost every measure, right? And
financially, for sure.
And financially, and it took a while for him to get his footing. I looked a second ago. I think he was 13 touchdowns, 12 picks his rookie year. He's in Miami. I mean, it's not like he's had incredible stability. It's not like he's had good run games in Tennessee, but it's not like he's had elite since any time he didn't have AJ Brown. Without AJ Brown, elite receivers. It's always been a little weird. Partly it's him, like he's not perfect, right? But you're right. I mean, he's a guy that really, as good a career as he's had, I wonder if you told him like, well, we're going to put you with Kyle Shanahan for 8 years, how would his career have looked?
Think about this. I just pulled him up. He went 8th. So they were on the right, his value, given where you had to take him, it wouldn't have been crazy. It actually sounds crazier when you say out loud Tannehill at 6. For some reason in my head, I had him going like 14th. I knew it was a relatively high pick. Going to 8th, I don't quite remember it that high. His TD to interception ratio is 214 to 114. So it's very close to being 2 to 1. He's a 65% passer, and he's only been to 1 Pro Bowl. But if you just look at his numbers, I do think with the right coach, and for a long time, Arthur Smith, those couple years with those good Tennessee teams, like he was more than serviceable. Now, a lot like a Cousins, a lot like a Dak, it's usually the kind of the waters that he's weighing in. It's like you can't really win a Super Bowl with this guy. He's either going to have a bad game or not be able to outplay the top 5 quarterback that you're going to see. But he actually, when you get him in the right scenario, Brock Purdy, right, he can shine. And that's most guys. Like most guys are not Josh Allen or Justin Herbert physical capabilities. That's ultimately it's not that those guys are really good at playing quarterback. It's their physical characteristics with their production, right? That's what makes, like, we can argue over Justin Herbert, who had a shitty game the other night. But even in his worst game I've ever seen him had, he had a couple plays in that game where you're like, that's what John Elway looked like if you go to YouTube. Like that's just what Ryan Tannehill or Purdy or any of these guys don't have. Right?
Yeah, which is the criticism of Kyle, right? If you were going to break down quarterback criticism of Kyle, I think one of the criticisms, and whether it's fair or not, I don't know, we could talk about it, but it's just it feels like he's better at evaluating 4th-round quarterbacks than 1st-round quarterbacks because we've never really seen him evaluate a 1st-round quarterback. The one he got was Trey, and it didn't go well. It was bad. It failed.
The problem, though, is they had the right mindset. They just took a guy whose physical characteristics, like, for example, Anthony Richardson, he's out for the year, which was kind of clear when you were watching the Colts-Jags game, or not Colts or whoever the hell they just played. Not that I watched much of it, but I flipped it on to watch a Gardner interception, and they go to the sideline.
Was it the really bad-looking one?
he had a couple, like the balls were like wobbly. It looked weird, but he was in the sling. I'm like, yeah, this guy ain't coming back in 4 weeks. I didn't know he was going to be out for the season, but I watched the first couple series, or definitely a lot of the first game of Anthony Richardson's career. His physical attributes, speed, arm strength, blow Trays out of the water. Like that, I think that's what they were hoping for, was like this guy ran. You'd watch him run. Now he's injury prone, is already pretty scary. That's where it parallels. But in terms of the package, to me, if Trey's package had been that, he's probably still around. I think they took a swing for a guy whose package was very, very limited. On top of the production was going to be very, very difficult. So I push back on that. I think he tried, and they just drafted a guy who, for whatever reason, doesn't translate. And honestly, Anthony Richardson, for every Anthony Richardson, sometimes it doesn't look as smooth as Anthony did in terms of how much faster he was than defenders, how strong his arm was. Like it was clear, like, damn, this works.
Yeah, it's also clear it's going to take some time, even if even if he stayed healthy.
Yeah,
right?
but at least,
Far
but
from
when you know
guaranteed.
you're in bed with a project, at least like, God, I can work with the speed, I can work with the arm strength, use a 50% passer.
Well,
That's
part of
all
the
you
argument.
want.
Part of the argument might be when you're drafting out of need, which is what the Niners did in the first round. You just, in later rounds, you are drafting guys because you really like them, like them in the amount that you can like a 4th round or a 7th round guy, right? But you're only drafting because you're not drafting need in the 7th round, right? You're just drafting the player you like the most that's available to you. Whereas in the first round, if we took a pie chart, like it's not 100%, we're just picking our favorite player. You are picking your favorite player that you think fits at the top, like in this spot that justifies being drafted this high.
It's a double whammy.
You're trying to draft high floors, right? Extreme high, or I guess high ceilings is a better way to put it.
Basically, a combination of them both. Like which
is not really
this guy not
Kyle's.
to be a good player.
When you think about Kyle, like he obviously has superstar players on his teams, but part of what has made him special as a coach is that he squeezes every ounce out of. It feels like medium level, right? It's not necessarily just the elite talents that are good for Kyle. He gets career backups to play good for 6 games. Like that's part of his strength.
But this conversation, and we're still several months away from it really getting in the nitty gritty. And obviously these guys are still playing, but there's going to be very serious conversations about the number 1 overall quarterback if I assume and it plays out that Drake Maye continues to play well. If he continues to play well and his team dominates, and we'll see, like if Caleb has some more bad games against better competition, it does not mean he's not an excellent prospect, but it's going to come. Because I think before a lot of people kind of push back, I've heard more and more, and just other people kind of insinuating and hinting at it. Like it's going to grow as a conversation. That doesn't mean the guy's going to go like, oh, Drake Maye won, Caleb could tell. No, he'd be the number 2 pick for sure.
It doesn't even mean he won't go 1, but
it doesn't even mean he won't go 1. I think it's fair to say if you just polled every 32 GM, now Brett Veach probably hasn't watched them both, but if they did, there would be some guys that have Drake Maye over. Now, I would say when the season started, it was probably like 31-1. Maybe now in middle of October, it's 26-6, right? And maybe as this process plays out, they meet the guy. I don't know all Drake Maye's measurables, but if I just assume he's 6'4", 225, right? Because I think the one thing we use Josh Allen forever about the inaccurate quarterbacks, like why you take him for Anthony Richardson. I think the Justin Herbert comp of just the size and like looking back, if that's Drake's comp, now I'd say Justin has a better arm, but just in terms of those guys, you just lean on those guys, you're going to be right more than you're wrong.
Yeah.
If the guy's a really good player, production's good, character's good, right? Like he's got all the checklists of the tangible stuff. And that's going to be fascinating to watch. Like to me, this week is massive. Like we evaluate these guys off the games, right? And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. And the draft conversation just, this guy's set. And sometimes they are. Like Marvin Harrison, like can have some bad games, whatever. Right. But like the quarterback,
Nick Bosa can get hurt and not play.
How does it really look? Like shit starts hitting the fan. Like, what do you look like against Kyle Whittingham? You just come off a bad game. You're playing this team that you wrote, fuck Utah. Drake's his team's crushing it. They look like they're headed toward the conference championship game against Florida State. So it's not like he's playing nobodies, right? He's going to be in big, bright lights games. So I'm glad that's just a conversation. It makes it interesting beside like this guy can't miss #1 overall.
Right. I think my prediction is at the end of the day, Caleb will still go 1 because I think the team drafting first is going to have to really ask themselves, are we gonna pass on some of the unique special things that this guy does? The problem is you don't get to just watch him operate from the pocket that much right now. His offense, I mean, I know you've watched SC. They're not like an on-time, all-the-time offense. It's not drop back, look, boom. It's like Caleb's running around, making crazy shit happen, which is great. I mean, it's part of what is special about him, but it's not exactly – we'll get to something Kevin O'Connell said about Purdy. It's not exactly what you want your NFL offense to look like, right? So.
Yeah, I just think when the dust settles, who's to say that Drake Maye is also not an elite prospect? Wikipedia has him 230.
Nobody's saying he's not an elite prospect, right?
Yeah, so if he's
saying it's 1A and 1B, so if it's 1A and 1B, then 1B might be 1A.
And he leads his team to an undefeated season. Let's say they upset Florida State. Let's say he takes them to the playoffs, and he's fucking awesome in that game.
Caleb rubs some GM the wrong way.
Yeah, he's 6'4". He's not 6'4". He's 6'4.5". He's 232. You know, he's all the intangible stuff. He's never had a like the other day. Did we talk about the player running on the field or the fan running on the field to Caleb?
We didn't talk about it, but I did watch Caleb talk about it. I don't know if you saw that answer.
I didn't see him talk about it. And listen, if any player ever takes out a fan doing that, I will never blame the player. If a fan's running at him doing that, but ultimately the fan filming himself, the reason he did it was because I thought he just did it against Utah in the conference championship game. Had he been writing "fuck his opponents" the whole year on his
last year? He'd had different messages, but did he have one that said "fuck Notre Dame"? Is that what the?
Well, yeah, that's what the fan came. So now the fan might have been making that up. I don't know for sure, but we know he had done it before. If that is true, it's like, well, brought that upon yourself a little bit.
A little. There was the video a few weeks ago of a player, college football player. I want to say it wasn't Ole Miss. Same deal, like kid running. Then you just see the camera like get upended. And the kid's like, I filmed the whole thing. You know, sorry, bro. Like you deserve to get shot. He ran into the guy. It's not like the guy ran after him like a heat-seeking missile. Like,
no sympathy for that guy.
Then none. Not only none. I'm rooting for you to get trucked.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
But Caleb did media availability yesterday maybe. And somebody asked him about it. And, you know, he was just like, everybody wants to be in these size 13.5s or something like that. You know, I don't worry. He said the line that like a lot of guys have been saying lately, which is like lions don't worry about sheep or, you know, that type of stuff.
Listen, I'm not some of this stuff about like, I can't speak to the guy's character. I don't know him personally. And I think some of the stuff that recently came out, having talked to the people at Oklahoma, his dad was a major, major force. And I think some of the quotes that have lingered about the team were not Caleb's. They were his father's, right? From the, like, we'll pick the team or we're not guaranteed to come out. That came from his father who, like, I mean, Xander Schauffele's dad was giving quotes at the Ryder Cup about it's all bullshit. And even Xander's like, listen, take what my dad says with a grain of salt. But eventually, one thing's going to happen. Is once the draft process starts, like, is your dad speaking for you or are you going to take control of this? You know, and it's hard. He's 20, 21 years old. I can see it coming from a mile away. Things are going to get weird.
I mean, ultimately, though, John, he'll be the one in the meeting, right?
He will, but his dad, like, if you can always go to his dad for a quote, it can make things worse.
Yeah.
Because in the NFL, the general manager, the owner, the coach, they don't want, it's one thing to get to know like a guy's wife or parent. Like I'm sure Andy has had relationships with people's parents over the years, right? Come around home games and stuff. There's a difference of like your opinions. Hell, in college at Fresno State, they would hang up on him or get in fights with him. Like this ain't allowed. I can't even imagine at the highest level of Power 5, let alone the pros.
Easier parent to hang up on, maybe potentially.
I think there's a famous story about Roger Carr and a phone getting thrown in a meeting.
You just made me think, talking about this, that Kyle's going to draft a quarterback this year too. Late. Because unless Darnold somehow comes back, right?
Yeah, I think that would, if Darnold comes back.
Which there's I kind of got this weird, like, I wonder if Darnold will now. Who this season hasn't played out yet, but is Darnold just had such a shitty experience two other places that he's like, you know what? Yeah, man, I'll hang here for a couple more years.
I could see him doing like the 2 for 8.
Yeah, and let me just hang around.
Like the guys.
But what is he going to do? Like, go play for the Raiders need somebody, or one of these teams. Like, what teams? Who's he want to go play? The Vikings? I mean, who's he want to go play for?
Yeah, I mean,
that would Vikings.
There is one of those where, hey, I'll give you a 2-year, or I'll give you 1 year, $13 million or something, like a number that's not like the Jimmy Derrick, but way better than anything the Niners would give him. And then you kind of put them in a weird spot where it's like, bro, I know you're already rich, but this could be the last time anyone ever offers you 8 figures.
Especially if you get to play, right? He wants to play.
Well, you get to start, but it'd be one of those, right? You sign that in March, then that team drafts the quarterback. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, they drafted Michael Penix.
Yeah.
That's when always
that's when all his fingers, by the way.
Well, I know.
No, I know. I'm just, somebody asked in the chat, so I mentioned it.
Yeah. It just,
that's a good point.
Last year, something that
about Sam.
It is reflection. It's weird, right? We all, as younger males mature way slower than females. You could argue in our mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s. Some of them are like rocking and rolling at like 19 years old. So it's not the end-all, be-all of that on the fingers. But it's like, do most of the top prospects in our, did Peyton Manning, Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck, like, were those guys doing that?
I had a buddy, I remember one time he used to manage a trampoline park. He's like, you know what our biggest problem is? I was like, what? He's like, young boys. They're insane. They throw their bodies all over the place. They are major safety risks. Like, yeah, for sure. It's true. Kirk Cousins, John, since we're talking about the Kyle clip, Cousins played Kyle with the Niners 4 times. 2017, he beat C.J. Beathard. That was Kyle's first time against Kirk. He threw for 2 touchdowns, a pick. 2018, Jimmy G threw 3 interceptions in the opener. You remember that game? Minnesota won it. In my head, Minnesota Niners. What was the game that Jimmy threw the pick 6 that got called back? That was at the Lions, right?
That was the following week in 18, Detroit at Levi's.
Yeah.
Pick 6 that got called back on a holding penalty or something, right?
That was at Levi's?
Defensive holding. The Lions game, they played the Lions twice. One game was in Detroit a couple years later.
Pick 6 that could have killed him on like the big comeback game. That was in Detroit.
The game you're talking about, because he tears the ACL, I think week 3 against the Chiefs. They lose to Vikings. He does not play well. Now, the Vikings that year were really good. I think they had an elite defense. I think that was the year like the Diggs catch against the Saints, maybe. Like that team was really high-end defensively. And then the next week against the Lions, who were not this version of the Lions, I'm pretty sure it was the home opener, and Jimmy was big-time bailed out.
Okay.
I'm thinking of a different game. That sneaky start to his 2018 season was actually like a precursor view into the Jimmy Garoppolo experience when everyone was just coming from the honeymoon phase of the final 5 games of 17. They're like, is this fucking Joe Montana meets Brad Pitt? And it's like, no, not really. Ask Raider fans, like, where's the guy? Yeah, he's still in the hospital. He's not going to play for a while.
Yeah, he's out. He's out this week against the Bears. That game, Kirk was 2 touchdowns, no picks. 2020 playoffs. Remember that game? Kicked his ass. Niners won that, and the Niners beat the Vikings in San Francisco. Again, 2 touchdowns, a pick. Kirk throws picks. Niners lead the league in picks right now, by the way, defensively with 10. So this is a 7-point line, 7 on Monday Night Football. Here's some Vikings. Here's a Vikings note. Every game they've played this year has been 8 points or less. So kind of like last year, except the reverse. Although they're 500 now, but last week was a slog against the Chicago Bears.
I mean they're missing their best player. To me, they were actually pretty competitive a couple weeks ago against the Chiefs. Last week, I'm pretty sure they had a relatively commanding lead once Fields got hurt. Weren't they up like 19-6?
I think it was like 6-6. Yeah, and then it was 19-6.
Yeah, to me, they've just done a purge.
The Bears had some awful turnovers in that game.
I mean, they were playing a guy from Shepherd College, so it's like I'm sorry. To me, the Vikings really, it's very rare you see this. A team that's competitive, a team that wins 13 games. I know they had some financial issues, but just do a purge. They cut Dalvin Cook. They get rid of Thielen. They get rid of Kendricks. They're clearly going to let Kirk walk. Like they've done a weird, like things are going well. Usually you see that like, you go 8-9, the run's over, new administration at the time. They've kind of done it when things were
they got a receiver in his prime.
Yeah, but they have a quarterback who's good and productive. They had other players, and they're just like, fuck it, let's just move on. Let's just pull the Band-Aid right now.
But they don't pull in the Band-Aid because they did it. They're like doing it in 2 years.
I don't think they had anywhere but they didn't have anywhere to trade him last year, right?
But
I think they would have traded him this offseason.
It's not like they drafted their Patrick Mahomes or whoever. It's not like they have their next quarterback, that they believe in, that they're waiting to transition to that guy.
Don't they feel like a Penix destination if they win like 4 games?
Yeah, I mean, well, how high do you have to draft in order to draft Michael Penix? I don't think you have to be a 4. I think you can win more than 4 games to draft Michael Penix. I mean, everybody thought last year he wouldn't have even been a second rounder because of his injury history and his age. So maybe now, well, I mean, this is what his 6th year of football, I think. It's at least
I text someone at the game like, where do you have Bo Nix in the draft? They're like, he's 28. Kidding. He's not 28. It's a joke that he's old. I think Penix falls into the same category. They're both like 24.
Yeah, I said Vikings are 500. They're 2-4. They're trying to get to 5. Well, they're a ways away from 500.
I thought you meant they were 500 in the 1-score games.
I don't know if they're all their games have been 8 points, so they're not 500 in 1-score games.
No. I meant carrying over from last year.
Oh, remember last year they had a crazy good rate against that. Thank you for the correction. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think Penix would be a really good fit for them. I think Penix would be a good fit for a lot of teams who, the one thing that made the Oregon game interesting for Penix is just he hasn't played a lot of games where he gets hit, and he got hit more than he's ever been hit at Washington in the Oregon game, and his completion percentage was under 60%, but he still stepped up and made huge throws when he had to. I mean, I think it was still a positive day for him. But I think there's questions like I want to play you some in a second.
Have you seen Penix in person?
I have not. Oh, I have, but I was at I was doing a Washington game last year, and he was sitting courtside, mid-court.
I wonder. It's hard for me to tell how big is he. He's 6'2", 210.
My guess is that he's not 210, but that I also don't think he's much bigger than 6'2". What's he listed at?
I mean, that's so fake.
I know. I just he's listed at 6'3", so we know that he's at least not 6'3", probably 6'3",
215. Yeah. So he's 6'2", 208.
He doesn't look skinny to me, but he definitely doesn't look big.
Did you? I saw KNBR's like trying to get with the time, so they're like Instagram clips of their host talking. It's always like Greg, which looks like he's at Levi's, and decked out in 49er gear, which has to make some people go, God, this is weird. My
refrigerator repairman who came today, John, said he grew up a Raider fan. He roots for the Niners now, and partly because we got Greg. So,
what's wrong with your fridge?
Just a little ice machine thing.
That's
the dispenser.
Do you have a water and ice dispenser?
Yeah.
God, that's a game changer.
Major.
Got a new fridge. I didn't get the water. It's a dumb idea. But Greg was talking with Barros, and Barros did a little research of Purdy in bad weather games. I guess they play like Drake maybe late in the season a couple years ago.
Yeah. I watched the video. It was a monsoon.
Yeah. So it's even for NFL standards, like that game would be one of those wouldn't even put much stock into. That level.
That's what I thought. I clicked on it like, okay, let's see. And then the second you click on it, it looks like the second half of the Bears game last year.
Okay. So, but he had a glove on, correct?
He did, except I didn't realize it until I heard Barrows say it, because in the video, there's not a lot of highlights of him throwing the ball. It's the Drake guy who threw for like 270 and now is an accountant. And then like a couple handoffs and Brock running for a touchdown. But yes, he did I heard Barrows say
what Drake's quarterback's hand side was.
Put a glove on his non-throwing hand. Yeah.
Well, what does that really do for you? Help you catch the snap? I mean,
I think.
it's the
Or
grip of the ball.
did you think it was the throwing hand? Maybe it
No,
was the throwing hand.
no. But yeah, but I know. But my point is because
It may have been in my head. I just assumed. I could pull up the video. Keep going.
No, it was just one.
Yes,
glove
I will.
on the non-throwing hand.
Oh, it was okay.
So, yeah, you're not wrong. But my point is because Greg was like, it's time to probably put on glove if you find yourself in this situation. Other quarterbacks have that cannot happen again. Like period, point blank, end of story. That is not allowed. You can't function as a team in a rain game if your quarterback can't pass the ball in college or in the NFL. I guess in college, if it's like Iowa State Drake, but I don't give a shit if in the NFL, if you're playing an 0-10 team or you're playing the Eagles or the Chiefs, that can never happen again. If you can prevent it.
Did Brady ever put it on his throwing hand?
I feel like he did not. But also Tom did not. Tom, to me, is the greatest cold weather quarterback I've ever seen. It didn't matter. I would, if I had to guess, Tom has big hands because he's tall, probably has big feet. You know what they say about people with big feet. No, Tom's actually hands aren't that big. They're only a little bit bigger than Brock's. Maybe he has before. And maybe some of it has to do with it's so cold in some of those games, you can't feel your hands.
Yeah.
Because one thing Greg was saying, and I remember this, Peyton a little bit later on in his career in Denver had to do it. You know, Carr has had some moments. Goff had some moments. To me, it's just basic math. The ball is the size of the ball. And if I was looking at Justin Herbert's hands, 10 enormous hands, right? If you just got, I bet Josh Allen has big ass hands.
He throws like
you got big hands. It's easier to grip the ball. Now, as Shaq said, part of the reason he sucked at free throws and just shooting, my hand was so big on the ball, it wasn't a natural motion. Well, in football, for most of us with normal size human hands that aren't like under 9, you grip an NFL ball, it's not as easy to throw it as these guys make it look because your hand doesn't get around it. So I think big picture, it's not going to hurt them that many games. Luckily, the location of everything. But it's inevitable. I don't care where you play. You're going to be in some weather games. I think there's a probably 50-50 chance that Thanksgiving night game in Seattle's drizzling, right? And who knows? Maybe it's raining. It feels like Seattle just drizzles more than it pours, doesn't it? From a football standpoint.
It does feel that way. Yeah.
Drizzles a lot. It doesn't feel like the Cleveland game. It just pours in some of those north, east, north, middle of the country games.
Yeah.
Not that much pouring out here.
Yeah.
Even Oregon, like you watch Oregon football in November, drizzles. It's a little wet, but it never feels like this is a torrential downpour.
Never rains at Autzen Stadium. That's what they say.
Seriously?
That's a famous saying. I mean, it does.
I feel like that's correct. I don't.
I think it's mostly correct. I know I have seen some heavy rain there, but it's a turf field too. Not that, but Seattle the same. So I think it makes rain looks worse on a grass field. That's the other thing, right? Like
yeah. Bears,
you
Eagles,
notice it. You don't really notice rain on a Chiefs turf field. Like you can't really. Sometimes you can't really. The one thing I did notice in hindsight was because I saw 43% of the ticket sales for the Monday night game are 49er fans. And one advantage I think the Browns have is that they don't it's not, and I'm not trying to, this is going to sound bad, but it's not really when you're like, I got to go to a road game this year. You don't circle that one. In hindsight, it felt like there weren't really, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there were a bunch of Niner fans in Cleveland. And the other thing is it should be probably on your destination. So I want to go to a game in Cleveland. It's probably pretty awesome. But
they're good, loyal fan base.
Yeah.
Probably not many people selling their tickets.
People probably don't choose to go. I don't know. Where is that stadium relative to their downtown? I've been to a basketball game there and a baseball game there. And I remember the baseball game after I came out of the stadium, there's a bunch of bars and restaurants. I was like, this is actually, they got a cool little setup down here. But
clearly by the water. It's right
yeah.
next to the lake.
Yeah. So I think it's all kind of close. I think they're all kind of close, but I'd recommend it. So somebody made a comment here in the chat, which is perfect to set up the conversation. Dave says, y'all wax poetic so much about physical traits to get you in the door. Execution at quarterback at the highest level is a mental game. So before I play this clip from Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell on Brock, from your time scouting in the NFL, what do you think the hardest, physical or mental, the hardest things to evaluate? What makes it so hard scouting college quarterbacks?
I would
Projecting
say
them.
true toughness, because a lot of these guys that are valued, a lot of them go to bigger schools, right? When you just think about a lot of the misses over the years, they come from powerhouse programs, means they're not getting crushed a lot. They're not in games that look like what we just witnessed. Even the occasional, like Ohio State, Notre Dame, they play in like 1 or 2 of those a year, right? So think about the top programs. They actually don't play in that many knockdown, drag out games every year. So it's hard to, like, when shit really hits the fan, what does it look like when you're getting peppered, when your team's losing, when you're just in adverse situations? I would say the intangibles of, reading complex defenses, right? The defensive coordinators, I would say, in the pros are higher level in the sense that, there's no, I would imagine there's some brilliant guys in college too, but you just have less time to implement stuff. You're dealing with guys. Some of these guys have only played football 3 or 4 years, like starting in 9th grade. You're right. You can give more to JJ Watt at 30 years old than you can your 5-star guy, even at like Alabama, right? In his second year. So the complexity of what you're looking at, obviously the offenses are more complex. I think the combination of that. So the complexity of the football, what football demands of your mind.
Yeah. That's
Is
what I
that
thought
just
that's
like,
a great, that's a great way
like
of
a high
putting it.
school to like graduate level? And the intangible, the toughness thing is because you just see these guys get peppered and get up. Like that Penix moment to me in an evaluation in a draft meeting, I'd be like, I was there at Washington, Oregon, and I watched this kid get fucking peppered and keep shaking it off and get back to the huddle. And I bet then when you go in to talk to his coaches, his offensive coordinator would tell you, or the offensive line coach might tell you, he's like, my guard and center said he just kept shaking it off and looked at him, telling him to get their heads up. And you'd be like, damn, I love this guy. That type stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, you might not get that at Ohio State or Alabama. It's like, yeah, Tua never really got touched. And when he did, he broke his hip.
I always go back to Zach Wilson, right? Never got hit his last year at BYU. So with that said, I asked you that because this is Kevin O'Connell on his coach's show. He gets asked about Brock Purdy, and this is what he said.
Narrative is it's easy to think Kyle and this run game and players around him, but what I see is a guy playing quarterback at a really high level, throwing with anticipation, seeing the field, making some critical plays on some third downs to extend drives and let them get back into what they want to be offensively on those early downs. And he's consistently done it basically every game he's played since getting the opportunity to be in there. So he's a challenge. He's in complete control of Kyle's offense and what they're trying to do. So you got to try to make him uncomfortable. The formula for a guy like Brock Purdy is no different than playing any other quarterback in this league. Try to make them uncomfortable. Try to make them feel like they've got to force some balls into some tight windows. And then can you make the play? Tips and overthrows. We saw it last weekend in Chicago. It'll be important that we try to see that a few more times this weekend at US Bank Stadium.
Got the sponsor in at the end there. What'd you think?
Did you see his Saban hand movements?
Yeah, I did. There's no way
like,
if we got a clip of him as a player, he talked like that. But
no,
job of a coach.
I'd bet $10,000 he never did hand movements. I'd bet there's a chance in the last 3 or 4 years he's implemented that. I think a lot of these Jimmy Sexton clients or whoever his agent is, they add that value.
Yeah.
And maybe there is something to the psychological.
They say there is that, like, for public speakers, hand gestures are effective tools of making points to people. But we know it feels like it's pretty natural.
His name is Brock Purdy. He plays quarterback. It's like, Jesus Christ. Good jawline, though.
I mean, great.
Harris, did you notice that?
I did notice.
Narrative is it's easy to think Kyle and this run game and players around him.
Very
but
relaxed.
what I see is a guy playing quarterback at a really high level, throwing with anticipation, seeing the field, making some critical plays.
That was the part. That was the part I really wanted you to hear was the first compliments he gives him, which is throwing with anticipation and seeing the field. Which I feel like when you like cover a young quarterback, throwing with anticipation always comes up as a thing that's really hard to do. And of course it's hard. Like when you stop the film at the moment before you throw, and I think it's always really impressive to see where the receiver actually is when a quarterback has to decide to throw the ball to him. is very different than what it looks like when the ball is arriving, right? And then seeing the field. Like you said kind of what I thought you'd say, which is what Kevin O'Connell said, is how can you possibly really know with most college offenses whether or not a guy can do it? I was talking to a buddy of mine who was a really good quarterback in college, who coaches quarterbacks now. And he was saying, we were just talking about quarterbacks in the league. He's like, it's really hard because guys are not asked to do that much. And so it makes it very difficult for them if you choose to like really have them read the defense as opposed to just read half the field or just go through progressions. He's like, it's a really different animal. Trying to find young quarterbacks who really read a defense it's hard to do. There aren't a lot of them because their colleges aren't asking them to do it.
Could argue there's a bigger gap between like the 5-star guy in high school to college than there is even in college to the pros. You're adding a lot, but think how hard it is. Like it's just all traits. If I'm playing at some powerhouse, I'm just kicking the shit out of everybody, like Arch Manning. I actually think Arch's team wasn't as good, but like that equivalent is why we see so many. We talk a lot about busts in the NFL. It happens just as many times at college, right? A guy not being good. Now, I mean, I think how many guys have to transfer because they suck, right? They're just not any good. So Kevin O'Connell's probably got Brock Purdy by about 7 inches. He's like 6'6".
Where do you go to college? Oh, San Diego State, right?
San Diego State. He's one of those guys, what was the famous joke? Like the tall guy just walks in the bar, I'm here for the sex. Like I think Kevin O'Connell.
I'm here for the free sex. I think
Kevin O'Connell's been getting laid pretty consistently since he was about 14, 15 years old.
I am the tall guy. I'm here for the free sex, I think is the line.
I actually know the girl he was sleeping with for a little bit and when he was at San Diego State. I mean, he was a legitimate, like,
let's welcome her to the show now.
Come on in. I think she's dating a UFC guy, former UFC fighter, kind of in that place, in that, lane.
What'd you think? Anything there? I love that, you can tell when a team broadcaster is also a radio host, which is the case with the Vikings, Paul Allen, because they try to get the coach in on narrative, this Paul Allen here is one of Papa's guys. He does a Papa impression actually, but he tries to bring him in like, what the way he asked the question was, what would you say generally Brock Purdy's asked to do in this offense? And Kevin O'Connell's like, yeah, I know what we're getting at here. We're talking about narratives. I thought I liked what he said in the sense that, like, I thought he gave a real answer on Brock Purdy and gave some insight on Brock Purdy. So
I wonder how negative Paul Allen's show gets on a weekly basis when the Vikings aren't playing well. Well, guys, there are some silver linings to the performance. It's like, Paul, we just lost 37-4. Are you sure?
He muffed it. That was always the call I remember.
Yeah, that was Jared Hay.
I think he muffed it. Yeah.
To me, could they win this game if the group of guys that did not practice and that, let's say they don't practice, don't play? Because to me, they should be able to win it with Ayuk, Mason, Mitchell, Kittle, Juwan Jennings, mix in some Ronnie Bell and the defense. Like, you have to win this game. Like, to me, this is like borderline must-win game, too. And by the time they're playing, the Eagles are playing the Dolphins, which I think is a major coin flip game. And the Lions are playing at the Ravens. I think it's fair to assume. I mean, they're an underdog. Like, they could easily lose that game. I mean, there's a decent chance on Monday the Eagles and the Lions have both lost. Cowboys are on a bye, but all of a sudden they get 2 losses. You just bank that extra win for the 1 seed, gives you a little room for just the random loss, right? Because anytime a random loss comes and you're even, that's a problem. And then you have to play. Then what if somehow, it's one thing if you lose the Eagles and you have a 1-game lead going into the game. Because it's not even that crazy to lose that game on the road. Like, you could play a good game, they could play a good game, and you lose on a last-second field goal.
Yeah.
That Moody misses.
Well, you hope it's not that Moody misses.
Yeah, that Jake Elliott hits. But you know what I mean? So, like, anytime, and we saw this in 2019 with Seattle on their ass, getting a little cushion, like in baseball and basketball, 1 game means nothing. In football, it does. In football, having a game is a really big deal. It doesn't feel like a lot when you're looking at it, but just because you just don't play that many games, every game you get closer to the end, having 1 game that on a given week can turn into 2. And worst case scenario, you lose 1 and they win, it just turns into 0. But I do think, like, you cannot afford, I don't think this season, to lose random games. You can lose if the Ravens get you, okay. Because who knows? Maybe the Eagles get got by the Cowboys in a game. Like you can lose to a real foe. I don't think this season, given where you just look at the other teams where they're going to end up and what it's going to take to get the number 1 seed, which clearly you can lose to the teams when you're a 7-point favorite. I know you were a big favorite last week. I think that game's going to age better as the season goes on. Right?
So you don't look at the Browns as a random team?
No. I mean, guy, that defense alone, they're going to win 9 games with fucking random quarterbacks. I saw today, Sean. I mean, they hope he come back this week, but who knows? I think if they did that to the Niners with PJ, I think they're beating 20 other teams in the NFL pretty easily with that defensive performance. Because they still were getting yards. It was, the Niners defense was making plays too. So I think that defense alone is a 500 team if your offense sucked. And they got enough players on offense beside their quarterback to be productive.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Good home field.
Well, to me, the Browns and the Vikings aren't even in the same universe right now in terms of who would you rather play? Every team in the league would sign up. I want to play the Vikings to try to win the game. You would not want to play that team. 1, you could lose, and 2, they knock your players out. Fuck that.
Yeah.
Especially in Cleveland. That's the other thing. Minnesota is historically that place, the Skull, it's really cool. I'm not saying it won't be loud, but the physicality of this team, I mean, give me a break.
Well, I mean, we might look up and the Browns are 6-2 or 5-3. They play Indy, Seattle, Arizona coming up in their next 3. They still play
Where's
Denver.
That Seattle game?
The Seattle game is at Seattle. Is that what you asked?
Good little test for Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah. They still play the Bears. They play the Texans. They play the Jets at the end of the year. So you're right. They could win 7 games.
I think what the Niners need, I mean, they don't need it, but what helps, I do think a lot of those NFC North teams are going to KO some of their divisional foes. Seattle could lose, obviously, to Cleveland. They just lost to Cincinnati.
Yeah.
The Rams are favored at home this week against Pittsburgh, but to me, they're not a lock to win that game. That division is just think of what the Niners have done. I guess they're 1-1 against it, but they get Cincinnati at home and they get the Ravens at home. At minimum, you go 1-1 in those games. You're going to be favored in both. You definitely got to get the Bengal game, the Raven game. I mean, that's Lamar's rolling. It's a tough matchup.
Thankful to get that game at home, right? I mean, if you got to lose the one, if you got to lose, somebody said to me, or I saw some comments on YouTube.
You don't get any of those games in November or December now,
right?
In the cold weather, even though
somebody said if Moody misses if Moody makes the kick, the whole story coming out of the game is different. And I don't think it is. I think that game felt weird. I don't think we're saying that much different stuff about them other than the stuff that relates to the standings if Moody makes that kick. And it's much better because Moody made the kick. And you and I both said after the game, more worried about Moody than what that L does to you, big picture. But all that other stuff still happened, and the Browns defense still played that way. And you still got guys hurt. So that game, I don't think was going to get viewed that differently coming out of it. Some of the things that happened. You would be 6-0 playing the Vikings. You'd be in great shape. But you'd still be asking okay, the next time we play a road rain game against a top defense, can we win that game?
I think you'd always rather get tested and get into a heavyweight fight and win the game than lose the game.
I agree.
To me, you still get to do the same message on Monday or Tuesday, coaching wise, being on guys.
But what I'm getting at is you'd rather, I think, if there's no rather, but to lose that particular game in that way, that's you'd rather do that than lose to the Ravens at home. You'd rather do that than lose to the Bengals at home. Road game, rain, good defense. Okay. You can live with that.
Yeah.
I think. More so than losing to one of those two teams on a cross-country trip,
I think Ravens-Lions this week is one of the better games. They actually might be really good. I think the Ravens are kind of finding their stride, getting guys back.
The Ravens might be really good, or the Lions might be really good.
I'm saying we know the Lions are pretty good, but I'm saying the Ravens, that game's going to be. I was looking at the schedule the other day. I'm I think that could be one of the harder games that no one really talks about. And by the time you play them, they could be competing with the Chiefs and the Bills for the number 1 seed. The Ravens, they play the Lions this week. Next week they play Seattle. Or no, next week they play Arizona. Then the following week they play Seattle.
Wow.
So
And they're rested when they play the Niners, right? No, they're just coming off a road game at Jacksonville. Never mind. That's not an extra rest game.
I think the Niners should pick up Larry.
You think the Niners should do what now?
Well, the Eagles signed Julio.
Yeah.
I mean, the Niners signed like Larry Fitzgerald.
Who's playing more golf right now, Larry or Robbie Gould?
Probably similar, but Larry Sneaky always plays golf. Picking Andre Iguodala. I wouldn't be opposed to a little veteran leader. No, I'm not being serious. The Eagles signed him just because they were legitimately. They had an injury. They signed their best. I know the way they operate. They have a list of free agents, and they were like, "Do we sign a guy off a practice squad, or we just sign this, see if it works? He's ready to go. If not, then we'll go that route." They're not signing him just for like shits and giggles. Like they needed a wide receiver.
Is the guy at the top of their list always super famous? Feels like that happens with them.
Why they have two lists. They have the free agents who are available, and a lot of times those guys are super famous because they're older guys that are like kind of fringe out of the league. Richard was that guy a couple years ago. Shady McCoy, like it's that guy at the end of his career, or you just go, do we sign player X on team's practice squad? And I think if you're a younger team, it's a no-brainer, right? If you're the Arizona Cardinals, you sign the dude on the Niners practice squad.
Yeah.
If you're the Eagles, the 49ers, the Bills, I think you are more inclined to sign Julio Jones, right?
Pan on the stream says, or Pon, we just had an investor meeting with Larry. Bro is retired, LOL.
No,
he's
he's
the
been
company
retired for a while. Megatron just went in the Hall of Fame.
Friday is the 1-year anniversary of the Christian McCaffrey trade, October 20th. Speaking of new acquisitions.
Feels like longer than that, doesn't it?
The NFL trade deadline is October 31st, John. So we are less than 2 weeks away. So if the Niners want Brian Burns or Patrick Surtain, better do that soon. But more like DJ Jones is probably the more likely Niner.
Yeah, what I don't understand is why the Panthers didn't trade Brian Burns and keep DJ Moore for their young quarterback. I think if they'd like to have a do-over, because clearly they haven't signed him to some huge extension, why didn't they? Because the Bears asked for one of the three guys, Derek Brown, Brian Burns, or DJ Moore. Wouldn't, if you had that do-over, just keep your Deebo Samuel, who's under contract, his second contract, trade Brian Burns, and keep the other defensive lineman?
Yeah.
Like I think they misplayed that. I think the Carolina Panthers are sneaky right now, like the old Raiders Browns. Like that, I think their owner has a lot of money. I think they are just lost at sea. I haven't looked at their schedule, but they clearly are pretty shitty. They feel that they're closer to a 0-win team than they are a 4-win team. So, I mean, it's hard to go winless, but like they feel like they got like 1-16 written all over them, don't they?
They play Houston,
their division,
Indy, and Chicago the next 3 weeks. They got to be able to win one of those 3 games, right? And they play Dallas, and they play Tennessee again, or then they play Tennessee, Tampa, Saints, Falcons, Packers, Jags, Bucks. I mean, if they don't win in the next 3 weeks in this Houston,
if the 49ers or Eagles, like that was their schedule, you'd be like, they're going to run
undefeated.
The
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's true. They should win a game. They should win a game.
What's our Thursday? If you're listening to this before, most of you are going to listen to this podcast after Thursday Night Football. What do we got tonight? Is it something good?
Derek Carr.
Oh yeah, Saints. By the way, as
Trevor Lawrence, as we're recording this, I mean he's a game time decision.
You and I laughed last year, like we thought all these advertisers were crazy for being mad that they didn't get as many eyeballs as they expected for Amazon. I don't know if you saw the announcement. Amazon's Thursday Night Football numbers are up 4 million from last year to 13.6 million viewers. So as expected, it's working out fine.
What would you guess in 3 or 4 more years, just the more and more people that have streaming capabilities? Is that number 15? It has a ceiling. Yeah. It's never going to be 30. But
the NFL season average is 17.
Did you read Ethan Strauss' article today?
I haven't yet, about the NBA ratings or the NBA projections and TV money.
he hit the fucking nail on the head. I just can never get over every single person that covers basketball just saying, oh, it's going to 3X, it's going to 3X.
Well,
And his point was simply, he used the Amazon example that people were complaining how much they paid, and they still got, as of this year, they were over 13 million. But even at the 9 million number, the NBA is a ninth of that on a good night, getting 1 million people. And Amazon, or excuse me, ESPN and TNT, their main two partners, have already said, like, we can't pay the same amount. Not we can't pay more. We can't pay what we paid you before. So that number is going to go down. And his point was, it's not like Apple and Google or Netflix at this point in time in 2023, maybe they were like this 5 years ago, are just gunslinging with deals. Even the Pac-12 is a good example. They set a number and they give you, but their metrics are way better than these cable companies. Like, value is everything they hang their hat on. And his point was, everyone keeps asking about tripling. That's all we hear is like, and Bill Simmons and guys like this, we're going to see guys making 70 million. We are? Based on what? The last deal was historically high. The ratings have gone down by half, and now cable is in a free fall. And these
by the way,
streaming
so are the
companies,
streamers.
yeah, but the streaming companies are very, very dialed. They've been in shambles because they've just overpaid television shows. But when it comes to rights for games, like, they know what they're getting into and they pick their price points.
Yep.
They're not just going to give. I think the NBA is in a lot of trouble relative to their previous deal. My take is, at best, they stay even, and there's a chance that they ultimately get less if they're going to be determined by these companies that aren't cable companies, because no one's bidding against each other. And is there a chance that in like 5 years, because one of his things was everyone always buys teams. He used the NBA as an example, but the NFL falls under this. Why the values keep going up, because the TV revenue keeps going up, and that's what the revenue flow to you, the owner. Yeah. Well, if it ever goes the other way, it would go the opposite way for team valuations, but then the salary cap would all be out of whack. It was bound to happen, and to me, it has the perfect storm. And I've been saying this for a while. Why is Adam Silver making a big deal about people playing in games? Do you think he actually gives a shit? He never did until.
Why are they doing an in-season tournament this year?
Money, money, money. I think they're in major trouble relative to what they are. I'm not saying they're going broke or anything. I'm just saying that.
Well, the golden age of television is over. It was actually like in the 90s, it turns out, in terms of like broadcast TV. You're right. Everybody is cutting. There are very few shows that go. When I say shows, I mean like the biggest college game day game or the big noon kickoff game. For the most part, they are finding ways to cut everywhere, because they're making less money, and because their parent companies are making less money. So what do you need if you're going to get historic contracts? You need a bidding war. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Pac-12. It sounds like Ethan wrote about it. That whole situation was a great example of like,
he didn't write about the Pac-12. Oh, I just use it as an example.
Yeah,
he wrote about
example
Apple. They want Apple to get involved.
Yeah, well, it's a perfect example of it. Then you got to bring up Apple, because Apple wants to get in. Apple's in on MLS. Apple's in on Major League Baseball. But when it came to, I know the number's been reported at $23 million per school per year in the Pac-12. I'd heard that it was going to be pretty easy to get it to 30. And that Apple was going to do all kinds of stuff. Apple was going to have like promotion in every Apple store would be like a map, like a Pac-12 map, and it'd show you like where to watch games and that kind of thing. But yeah, they like, I think if you were Apple, like, how badly did Apple want college football? I think pretty badly. Like, they really tried to get in. They were willing to spend basically $300 million a year. Great, get in with Apple, right? What's Apple's historic success rate? It's very high, but they believed in it so much, and yet they still weren't willing to go, okay, if it's going to take 45 to get this deal done, we're going to do that deal, right? Oh, well, the league's going to fall apart. There won't be a deal to do if you don't go to 45. We're not going to 45. I'm not saying that conversation happened, but the idea of there being some like bidding war where like a network that's not in on the NBA now, say Fox or whoever, or Apple or Amazon, is going to overextend to acquire nobody's overextending to acquire the property at this point. and everybody's money is pretty well spent. So the leverage for the NBA, like they can't threaten Turner, I don't think, and Disney with like, all right, guys, if you don't, we're going to Peacock. Peacock's not putting a big offer in front of them. Apple's probably not putting the offer they currently have. And I mean, I don't know that, but I'd be surprised. Like, there's a lot of other work that goes into carrying these games. Turner produces a ton of these games, right? Turner produces them. Yeah. Apple, if they're going to produce the games, the streamers are not set up to produce the games right now.
Well, who produces that when Apple has the baseball games? Who did that? Did
MLB Network produces those games.
And they just paid for the rights to broadcast it.
Yeah.
Or like to
ask me who produces Amazon. NBC produces Amazon. Right? So like
so Amazon does not have a production team?
Well, I mean, they hire a team, but like if you look at it, it all looks like NBC. It's a lot of NBC people. I think my guess is the trucks are NBC trucks. I don't think Amazon, I mean, they're Amazon built, paid for.
Logoed. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's NBC, I think, handles a lot of the back end on that stuff. If Apple had done the Pac-12 would have handled a lot of the back end work on that. So, it costs a lot of money. Like you're not going to get like Turner has Turner Studios and Turner produces the games. I don't know this. I mean, the NBA, have you ever watched the NBA TV stuff? There's a significant drop in everything because it costs a lot of money I remember when the NBA TV first went on the air, they would interview players and they didn't have like the infrastructure set up where like players would get like a regular headset or a microphone with I remember the first years they were doing it, players were wearing these single ear headphones with like a big mic. If you're not watching, you can't see what I'm doing, but they're cameraman headsets. Like it looked very, not very low budget, but not premium budget. So if you're going to get a streamer involved, somebody has to bear the brunt of putting all those productions on. Building the studios, having the facilities, having all the hardwire, just all that stuff is really expensive.
Well, if you turn on Golf Channel, why is their production value pretty high level?
NBC.
Yeah. I mean, it's
just an NBC. Yeah.
It's not some mom and pop shop operation. Right. So I think the problem.
Well, I read the other day, John, Acura has not gotten into the electric car game. They don't even do hybrids, but they're coming out with a new electric SUV next year. It's almost entirely GM built. Like to build anything from the ground up is so expensive that people who wouldn't otherwise partner because they're like, it's basically a Cadillac Lyriq.
Well, I heard Charles Barkley saying within the last year, whenever he signed his new deal with TNT and Turner, a huge, like if they don't re-up the NBA, he'd be able to retire or free agent or whatever. Oh. It's obviously his deal is predicated on them having basketball, but part of the reason that's in the deal is like, it's not even a lock that they get it or want it, which makes sense. Think of
the NCAA tournament.
Think of the story. If everyone that paid for the NFL, their audience dipped in half, it'd be like one of the biggest stories in American sports history. In the NBA, it's like
audiences.
And this is where I respect Ethan. And this is why I think he went solo. You would never find that article on ESPN.com or even The Athletic. They're too intertwined with the NBA. It's not allowed. And, it's why Substack, I think, has so many people. I mean, Ethan's really the only one he is the only Substack I have. But I hear enough people in other podcasts.
Like John Canzano, I got Canzano. I got a couple.
That, they're just able to do whatever they want. And it's a powerful thing. And this is, I want my big J's to write about shit that make people uncomfortable. And we don't get that as much anymore because it's all.
Well, when you consolidate media, it's harder.
I also think there's an element of, I think Twitter mainly, because that's where a lot of the journalists hang out a lot of the time. You never want to go up against the grain. You don't want to hear negative things. And I think people get in that industry, the writers industry, they get very obsessed with that. And they're less likely to, I feel like when we were a kid, you could find an article on anything. And a lot of it, nowadays, half of that stuff, it would have been so ugly.
Yeah, your columnists just write it and you get some letters. but it wasn't
Exactly.
in his face 24/7.
You
They'd
would
go on
never
the sports reporters and just like say some shit. And it
you
just
would
would
never
disappear.
find what Ethan wrote on any of the main things that you would click on right now.
But again, John, I think
ESPN.com, theathletic.com, New York
think
Times,
they're all. It's all
which
so
I guess is the Athletic.
which is the Athletic, and when you're also dependent on, there's not that much independence, and so
No, there's not anymore.
so everyone's, the ESPN is. They're which again, like you can cover the NBA, like you can do that stuff. Like that's the part that's crazy to me, right? But they don't. Nobody does. The NBA calls immediately and complains, right?
Well, like no one's written an article, not a soul that I've seen, of just what the fuck is James Harden doing? And you are not going to get that from anyone that covers the NBA, I don't think.
Which is, if that's true, that makes no sense. Because I was actually trying to figure out. I've never muted a topic. I couldn't. It is the least interesting topic on earth to me right now. James, I could not give a shit what James Harden is up to, like because I just it's such a stupid. This is so. How are you? How is James? Nobody wants it.
But like when
crazy.
Antonio Brown,
I mean, I get why
comparing.
Clicks, but
I'm not quite comparing James to Antonio Brown. Obviously, he's been arrested several times. To my knowledge, James hasn't been. It's nothing criminal. But just in terms of once Antonio stopped listening to anybody football-wise, everyone was dragging the guy. And it just feels like people are podcasters will, but the people that write about the NBA, the links I see on my feed, you won't see. And it just doesn't feel that way. And that's crazy to me because it's like jump the shark. It's Antonio Brown level on the court.
Yeah, see, I've ignored the story, so I just assumed someone's ripping them and ripping them, and everyone's getting ripped because that's where's Peter Vesey?
Guy, those days are done. You only find it on Substack. Maybe I need to YouTube Substack. If I subscribe to like 10 people, we're talking $150 a month.
Maybe we should. Yeah. I like Substack. Canzano. I read Canzano. I read Ethan. All right.
I subscribed. I think I unsubscribed to him. He was relentless. Canzano.
You can read some articles for free too. He told me I was texting with him the other day. He told me 90% of his articles are paid.
I think he's making like $500,000 or something on it.
I know Ethan wrote about Canzano.
Yeah, I think he's crushing.
Covered the Bulldogs once upon a time, John Canzano.
So did Woj.
So did Woj. So did Andy Katz, maybe? Yeah.
Andy Katz. Yeah.
John Branch, who's an excellent writer. He covered the Bulldogs. Anyway. All right.
See, Andy Katz is the guy. I think he works for the NCAA now.
Yeah, he does. What lefty? I mean, I think he probably. I don't know if he was the first wave of cuts from ESPN, but
works for the man.
Yeah. However much
I like Andy Katz. This is not a shot. I always respected his work. That'd be a tough transition.
It's just different, right? When it comes from state media, right? Remember when Mike Silver wrote for Washington for the Washington football team for a week? Probably was not easy.
No.
And that's Jim Trotter's whole point. I mean, not Jim, but everybody, NFL media. It's like, what was the tweet I saw? It was like Rap Sheet, who's an excellent reporter, but he tweeted the other day. It was like
Jerry Jones has a big dick.
It was something about Anthony Richardson. It was just basically he's getting the surgery, XYZW, but it's just a reminder how much they believe in this guy. It's like, if I was them, I guess I'd kind of believe in him. But have you watched Anthony Richardson play for the Colts? If you were Jim Irsay this year and go, we definitely nailed it. Superstar.
Some of that, I not defending that tweet. I love Shefty. He does some of that too. It's like if you're boys with Ballard or the coach, some of it's like,
yeah.
Even though I don't think you have to do that, like they really care, but some do. I don't know. It's weird.
I guess clearly they do, right? And it's like it's an easy little win. It doesn't hurt.
They care. They care.
Yeah. All right. On that note, we out.
Yeah.
All right. Later, everybody. Thanks for hanging. Adios.